People from Viking times lived lives of unimaginable intensity. By day, they sailed across icy seas, farmed rugged land, built entire homes by hand, and fought with terrifying brutality. But by night, they slept not restlessly, not lightly, but instantly. Their sleep was deep and undisturbed. In the 21st century, sleep has become a struggle. We're surrounded by constant stimulation, notifications buzzing, screens glowing late into the night, and a culture that glorifies hustle over rest. Blue light disrupts our melatonin, caffeine fuels our exhaustion, and anxiety fills the silence that used to invite sleep. We've built lives disconnected from the natural world, and our sleep pays the price. Now contrast that with the Vikings. They had no clocks, no emails, no social media to scroll through. When the sun set, their day ended. They slept when it was dark, rose with the light, and lived in sync with the earth's natural rhythms. Their homes were dimly lit, warmed by fire, and insulated with fur and thick wool. After long days of physical labor and fresh air, their bodies were primed for deep, uninterrupted rest. Where we chased sleep with pills, podcasts, and blackout curtains, they earned it, organically, consistently, and fully. The Vikings' sleep wasn't optimized. It was natural. And in many ways, it was far better than what most of us experience today. And this wasn't luck. It was the result of an entire lifestyle designed, consciously or not, to support restful, immediate sleep. Their world lacked everything that keeps modern people awake at night. No blue light, no artificial noise, no glowing clocks or buzzing phones. When the sun went down, darkness wasn't partial. It was total. Inside their longhouses, without electricity or glass windows, the absence of light sent a powerful signal to the brain. It's time to sleep. The body responded with melatonin, the natural hormone that regulates rest. In Viking homes, melatonin didn't need a supplement. It flowed on schedule every night. Their homes were structured for rest. The longhouse, made of timber and turf, was a shared space. Dozens of people might sleep in the same room, lying on beds of straw covered in sheepskins and furs, surrounding the hearth in the center. The fire crackled through the night, radiating warmth, casting flickering shadows, and mimicking the calming rhythms we now try to recreate with sound machines. Vikings didn't need ambient noise playlists. They slept inside one. Physical exhaustion was another key. The Viking lifestyle demanded near constant movement. Whether raiding coastal settlements or tending fields and livestock, their muscles were worked from sunrise to sunset. Fatigue wasn't an inconvenience, it was a certainty. Sleep wasn't optional or delayed. It came swiftly and naturally as the body's response to hard labor and full effort. Their meals also supported sleep. Before bed, they often ate warm, heavy stews made from meat, root vegetables, and dense bread. These foods were rich in calories and fat, which raised body temperature and encouraged drowsiness. There is speculation that Vikings used herbal remedies as well. Valerian root, chamomile, and other calming plants native to the region could have been brewed into teas or chewed raw. Modern science confirms their sedative effects. Whether the Vikings understood the biology or not, their use of such herbs was aligned with deep rest. The psychological state of Viking people also played a role. They believed in fate, a fate woven by divine forces beyond human control. This worldview removed much of the anxiety modern people feel before sleep. Worrying about tomorrow had no purpose. Death, if it came, was part of the plan. There was no point lying awake hoping to change it. That sense of acceptance brought peace to the mind. And a peaceful mind sleeps. Unlike today, there was no pressure to fall asleep at a specific time, and no guilt if they didn't. They didn't check the hour or count how many minutes of sleep they might get. There were no clocks, no alarms, and no concept of bedtime anxiety. They simply lay down when tired and rose when the body was ready, often aligned with sunrise. Their lives followed natural light, not rigid scheduling. Even their dreams had meaning. Sleep wasn't just rest. It was a bridge to the spiritual world. Dreams were messages from the gods, signs of the future, warnings from the beyond. These beliefs gave value to sleep. It wasn't wasted time. It was sacred time. The more restful it was, the clearer the visions might be. Viking households were close-knit. Sleeping together wasn't strange. It was essential. In the cold Nordic nights, shared body heat could mean the difference between comfort and danger. Children slept near parents. Warriors curled beside other warriors. Even animals sometimes shared sleeping quarters. This closeness regulated temperature, but also triggered a primal sense of safety. Safety calms the nervous system, and calmness invites sleep. There were no stimulants, no energy drinks, no late-night caffeine, no processed sugar floods. Viking diets were simple, hearty, and free of additives that disrupt modern sleep. Even their evening activities helped them wind down. Storytelling, carving, singing, all slow, deliberate actions that eased the mind. There was no overstimulation, nothing to keep the brain buzzing. Even the act of preparing for sleep was different. Before a raid, warriors didn't stay up anxiously sharpening blades or whispering plans. They ate, said their prayers or chants, placed their weapons beside them, and rested. A well-rested warrior was more useful than a tired one. They knew that sleep was strength. The idea of sleep when you're dead would have seemed foolish to them. You slept because you wanted to live, and the world around them helped. Outside, the natural sounds of wind and wolves weren't jarring. They were expected, predictable, rhythmic. Modern noise is unpredictable. Sirens, traffic, alerts, which jolts the nervous system awake. Viking sounds, by contrast, blended into the environment. They were part of the story, not interruptions. No one needed melatonin. No one needed ASMR. No one needed a sleep coach. Because everything, from food to fire to belief to environment, was aligned. They weren't fighting their biology. They were living inside it. People from Viking times didn't fall asleep scrolling through stress. They didn't sleep under LED lights. They didn't worry about being tired the next day. They worked hard, lived fully, believed deeply. And when the night came, they slept instantly. And when they woke, they did so slowly. There was no blaring alarm to drag them out of a dream. The world itself woke them. The gradual return of light through cracks in wooden walls, the sounds of animals stirring, the first shift of footsteps on frozen earth. These were the cues that morning had arrived. The transition from sleep to wakefulness was natural, fluid, and gentle. This mattered. The body wasn't jerked into panic. It returned to the day calmly, having fully recharged through a night of uninterrupted rest. Sleep was not compartmentalized. It wasn't something they chased only when it became impossible to ignore. It was integrated, a respected part of the rhythm of life, like eating or breathing. Rest wasn't delayed in favor of productivity. There were no deadlines extending deep into the night. no pressure to stay on. When work was done, it was done. When day was over, so was activity. And sleep arrived, not as an escape, but as a return. Even among the fiercest Viking warriors, sleep was never seen as weakness. On the contrary, it was part of preparation. It was the stillness before the storm. Rest gave clarity. Rest gave strength. And so they protected it. They valued it. They didn't waste it with worry or dull it with distraction. They allowed themselves to fall fully, instantly, into it. Some historians believe that the Viking world even embraced a practice known as segmented sleep. Without artificial light to stretch the night into unnatural lengths, people naturally woke in the middle of the night for a short period before returning to sleep. This pattern is documented in other pre-modern societies and likely occurred in Viking longhouses as well. During this quiet interlude, they might tend the fire, speak softly, or reflect. But it wasn't seen as insomnia or a problem. It was simply part of the night's rhythm. And just as easily as they stirred, they would drift back into their second cycle of sleep, completing what nature intended. There was no concept of sleep hygiene, because their entire existence was built around it. Their bodies were attuned to the rise and fall of light. Their work created exhaustion without overstimulation. Their beliefs prevented the kind of chronic anxiety that plagues the modern mind. Their diets supported deep rest, and their communities offered comfort and safety, the essential ingredients for true relaxation. In a way, they didn't just sleep better than us. They lived better in preparation for it. Every part of their daily lives fed into the night. There was no split between work mode and sleep mode. It was one long, continuous cycle of effort, release, and restoration. And in the silence of the Arctic winter, with the fire dimming, the animals settled, the axe at their side, and fate already written by forces greater than themselves. They closed their eyes. No tossing, no turning, no second guessing, just stillness, breath, and the kind of sleep that today feels out of reach. But it wasn't magic. It wasn't myth. It was structure. It was habit. It was wisdom born of living in harmony with the land and the body, not apart from them. And perhaps that's the true lesson from Viking times. Not that they had a single secret, but that everything about their world was the secret, and it all worked together, quietly, seamlessly. So if you're wondering how they fell asleep so easily, they didn't need help. They didn't try. They just lived in a way that invited sleep to arrive on its own. And when it did, they didn't resist it. They surrendered, fully, completely, without fear, without distraction, without noise, just fire, warmth, breath, and rest. In modern times, we chase what the Vikings welcomed. We research sleep cycles, design ergonomic pillows, take supplements, and download apps, all to recover something they experienced without effort. Their world did not require optimization. It simply existed in a way that supported the natural function of the body. No competing obligations, no overstimulated senses, no fractured routines. Sleep wasn't scheduled. It was earned. Their relationship with the elements also played a role. Cold air, especially in northern climates, is now known to improve sleep quality by lowering core body temperature, a condition ideal for the onset of deep sleep. Viking homes, while insulated with turf and layered with skins, were still open to the seasonal chill. Sleeping in cool air wrapped in furs, surrounded by others, The body naturally moved toward rest. This contact with nature wasn't just external, it lived in their rhythm, their timing, their acceptance of cycles. They planted and harvested by the sun. They traveled by the stars. They observed the changes of the moon. These things were not distractions. They were signals. And when those signals said it was time to rest, they listened and obeyed. The Viking mind, too, was protected from much of the internal noise that plagues the modern brain. Without endless information streams, without constant stimulation, their thoughts had space to settle. Evening brought not digital chaos, but routine, putting away tools, gathering around fire, exchanging words or songs, tending animals, eating, and retiring. This consistency formed patterns in the brain, patterns that, once repeated daily, became cues, silent instructions that told the body it was safe, it was full, and it was time to sleep. Their belief in spirits, gods, and fate only deepened this trust. They did not fear the unknown in the same way. To them, each night wasn't filled with dread or insomnia. It was a passage into dreams, into visions, into realms beyond the waking world. They gave themselves to it completely, understanding it as both biological and sacred. Some Viking graves have been found with feathers, herbs, and carved stones beside the bodies, symbols of peace, rest, or dreams. These were not placed randomly. They represented something. A final rest, yes, but also the quiet respect for sleep itself. In life, these same objects may have been part of their sleeping rituals. A carved token from a family member, a small cloth scented with herbs, a protective symbol scratched into wood near the bed. In their mythology, sleep and death often overlapped. The Norse god Odin was known to wander between worlds, seeking knowledge through sleep-like trances. The goddess Nod, who personified the night, rode across the sky in a chariot, bringing darkness to the world. Sleep was a presence, a character, a force. It was not dismissed, it was not feared, it was respected. Even the warriors, hardened and brutal, understood this. When they camped between battles, they did not waste their nights on anxiety. They slept, fully armored, weapons nearby, their minds quieted by the belief that their fate was sealed. There was no what if. There was only what is. And that kind of surrender silences the mind in a way modern meditation apps still fail to teach. The Viking world was so full of danger, but that danger did not disrupt their rest. In fact, it demanded it. Recovery was a form of readiness. The body needed strength for whatever came next. Storm, battle, voyage, or labor. Without sleep, a man was weak. Without sleep, a family could not function. So they treated it with the seriousness it deserved. And in this seriousness, paradoxically, came simplicity. They didn't obsess over sleep. They didn't analyze it. They simply allowed it. They let it come when it came. And because their lives were structured in harmony with their environment, it always did. Everything about their design, from the shape of their homes, to the structure of their families, to the pace of their work, contributed to a cycle of energy and rest, not because they were enlightened, but because they lived in rhythm with the natural order of things. What we now call sleep science was once just life. It's tempting to think of Viking sleep as something mysterious or supernatural. But in truth, it was practical, functional, built into the daily repetition of physical exhaustion, communal closeness, and spiritual calm. There were no sleep coaches, but there was discipline. There were no blackout curtains, But there was darkness, no sleep trackers, only a body that knew when to lie down and when to rise. And in the glow of the hearth, with firelight dancing across wooden beams, the weight of the day behind them and the cold of the world kept just far enough away. Viking men, women, and children closed their eyes, trusting in the gods, in each other, and in the rhythm of the world. And they slept. No rituals, no resistance, no delay, just quiet, just breathe, just peace. Their minds stilled not by effort, but by structure. Their bodies supported not by gadgets, but by work. And their souls unburdened not by therapy, but by belief. They didn't chase sleep. They didn't fight it. They didn't fear it. They let it come. And when it did, they surrendered. Just as the fire dimmed, the longhouse stilled, and the wind passed over the roof like a lullaby written by the land itself. They didn't just fall asleep. They disappeared into it. And in that disappearance, something remarkable happened. They healed, not just their muscles or their bones, worn and battered from endless labor or travel, but their thoughts. In the silence of those Nordic nights, the absence of chaos gave the Viking mind a kind of sanctuary. Thoughts were not tangled. Regrets were not recycled. The mind, emptied of useless input, returned each night to stillness. The stillness was not rare. It was expected. It was daily. And it was enough. Their children knew it too. From a young age, Viking children were conditioned not to fight sleep, but to flow into it. Their days were filled with effort, learning, ritual, and rhythm. Their nights were predictable. They didn't beg for another hour. They didn't resist the dark. They simply settled, comforted by the warmth of family and the security of familiarity. Their bodies grew strong. Their minds grew clear, all in the arms of rest. That rest was physical, yes, but it was also cultural. Their world did not glorify exhaustion. It glorified readiness. And you could not be ready for sea, for battle, for harvest without sleep. The tired were vulnerable. The well-rested were dangerous. Vikings understood this not through study, but through survival. Sleep was not a weakness. It was armor. They wore it quietly. No announcements, no rituals beyond the ordinary. Just the slow dimming of the day, the placement of a weapon within reach, and the calm that came from knowing that nothing more needed to be done. The day had ended. The work was complete. The fire was low. The gods were watching. And the longhouse, built with the hands of those who would now rest inside it, was holding the cold at bay. The dreams that followed were not distractions. They were considered meaningful. They were paid attention to. Elders might interpret them. Warriors might act on them. Stories passed down through the sagas often began in sleep, with a vision, a warning, a prophecy. Sleep was not the end of activity, but the doorway to another kind of knowing. Even their posture reflected their trust. They slept on their sides, curled or stretched, not as people defending themselves, but as those who had done enough for one day. Their tools were set aside, their animals tended, their kin nearby. The crackle of fire was the only sound, and when that fire went out, so did the final traces of wakefulness. We study sleep now, measure it, try to optimize it, but the people of Viking times simply aligned with it. They lived in a way that made sleep inevitable. Their bodies exhausted, their minds unburdened, their homes tuned to the pulse of night, and their beliefs gently lulling them toward dreams. The simplicity of their world was not a disadvantage. It was a gift. without synthetic light to delay the onset of sleep. The darkness arrived with authority. Without clocks to bind them, time flowed as sensation, not as measurement. Without anxiety born from imagined futures, the mind rested in the truth of the present. The cold was real, the fire was warm, the roof held, the axe was ready, the people were near, the gods were silent. What more could be needed? And this happened not once, not occasionally, but every night, season after season, year after year, until the rhythms weren't just habits. They were heritage, passed down not through lecture, but through life. Even in death, the Vikings honored rest. Warriors who died bravely might be buried with their weapons, their animals, sometimes even in boats, laid out as if preparing for a voyage to the eternal night. Their rest was not forgotten. It was ritualized. The final sleep was still sleep, only longer, deeper, and closer to the gods. And so each night, as sleep claimed them, they let it take everything. The pain of the day, the worry of tomorrow, the noise of the world, and even sometimes the hope of waking again. For if they did not rise, they believed they might rise elsewhere. In Valhalla, in halls of golden feasting among the honored dead. Sleep then was not an interruption, it was a passage, and each time they walked with full trust. Because to them, sleep was not silence, it was story. Not emptiness, but fullness. Not weakness, but readiness. And as the world beyond their longhouse turned slowly under stars unseen, and the wind continued to write forgotten songs across the darkened hills, the people from Viking times lay still, the fire now embers, the breath slow, the dreams just beginning, and the body finally at peace. Not because they tried, not because they forced it, but because they lived in a way that gave sleep nothing to fight against. They slept instantly, and the night held them like a promise. And that promise was simple, that for all their effort, all their pain, all their victories and defeats, rest would come without condition. It didn't matter whether the day had brought glory or failure, bloodshed or quiet. The night did not ask for explanations. It only asked for surrender, and so they gave it, fully, without delay, without fear. The way they lived removed all the barriers modern people unknowingly build against sleep. There were no late-night schedules to disrupt the body's rhythm, no artificial light to confuse the brain, no pressure to rise early for a commute, no mental clutter carried from screen to pillow. Their attention was grounded in food, in fire, in family, in gods. And when the sun disappeared, so did the need to remain awake. The longhouse, quiet and dark, was not just shelter. It was the womb of rest. Even its construction supported sleep. Thick walls for insulation, roofs layered with turf for warmth, few openings for light or wind. Inside, the space was narrow and low, which retained heat and made the flicker of the fire feel close and comforting. The sounds were predictable, the same every night. The groan of timber, the breathing of cattle, the gentle movements of kin shifting under fur. That sameness lulled the brain into trust. In the modern world, we fear boredom. In the Viking world, repetition meant safety. If nothing had changed, there was no threat. And when there was no threat, there was no reason to remain alert. We now understand this neurologically, that the body cannot sleep deeply in environments that feel new or dangerous. But Viking sleep was rooted in familiarity. They returned each night to the same space, the same fire, the same straw, the same breath of those beside them. Their nervous systems didn't need to stay on guard. So they relaxed. And the moment that tension left their muscles, they crossed into unconsciousness without effort. Their physical closeness also released oxytocin, the hormone of bonding and calm. Mothers slept with their children, warriors near their kin, elders beside the hearth. Even in death, Viking burials often involved positioning the body as if at rest, wrapped in familiar materials, surrounded by objects of meaning. They understood, perhaps better than we do today, that the body sleeps best when it knows it's not alone. The daily rituals of their world prepared them. In the evenings, tasks slowed, fires were tended, tools were cleaned and put away, bread was broken and words were exchanged. They did not rush, they did not multitask. They completed what needed doing, and then they stopped. That stopping, that conscious ending to activity, told the mind it was free. Free to release, to let go, to fall. And once they fell, there were no interruptions, no traffic outside, no sudden electric hums, no emails arriving in the dark. Even their dreams unfolded uninterrupted. Stories from the subconscious, woven with threads of gods, symbols, and fears, not corrupted by television, but shaped by the mythology they carried in their blood. Their dreamscapes were wild and sacred, battles, visions, journeys, transformations. And when they woke, those dreams were often shared, remembered, respected. The collective experience of sleep added another layer. It was not isolating. It was communal. Dozens of people sharing the same sleep cycle, the same stillness, the same space. That collective surrender created an energy, a stillness so dense, so full, that it carried even the most restless among them into rest. Even illness and age did not rob them of sleep. The old, who no longer farmed or fought, became keepers of rhythm. Their role was not diminished, it changed. They remained close to the hearth, near the fire, sharing stories and wisdom, their sleep no less sacred for being slower. And when their final rest came, it was met not with machines and sterile rooms, but with touch, with silence, with breath, and the cold hush of the earth awaiting them. We often try to recreate this world. Candles instead of bulbs, wool instead of plastic, silence instead of streaming. But these are fragments, imitations. The truth is, Viking sleep came not from technique, but from alignment with nature, with belief, with work, with community. They did not fall asleep to escape the world. They fell asleep because they were of the world, shaped by it, supported by it, held gently within it. And in that embrace, every night, without drama or delay, they slipped into the dark like ships into still water. Soundless, steady, gone. They didn't ask how. They didn't try harder. They didn't chase rest. They simply lived lives that left no resistance behind. And when that resistance was gone, only one thing remained: sleep. Instant, complete, sacred. And sacred it was, not just in silence, but in meaning. Sleep in Viking times was threaded into the very fabric of life and death. It was not merely a biological function, it was a passage, a boundary they crossed with reverence and regularity. Each evening, when the fire dimmed and the frost pressed against the outer walls of the longhouse, the Norse soul moved inward toward a place of warmth and surrender, unburdened by doubt, noise, or anticipation. Their concept of time aided this. Vikings didn't live by the hour. They lived by light, by season, by instinct. Time was not measured in minutes stolen from the night, but in tasks done by the day, and peace earned when the sky dimmed. They didn't worry about sleep efficiency or whether they had achieved 8 uninterrupted hours. They laid down because their work was done, and they woke because the world called them to rise. Their circadian rhythm was not something to be repaired. It was never broken. What we now call sleep disorders were rare or non-existent. The elements of their lives that cause us stress, artificial lighting, screen time, unpredictable schedules, hyperstimulation, were absent. Their minds were quieted by ritual and simplicity, and their bodies knew only the rhythms of work and restoration. Even anxiety, when it appeared, was softened by belief. The Norns, the spinners of fate, had already woven the threads of their destiny. If death came, it came with honor. If sleep came, it came with purpose. Their dreams were not seen as random noise, but as visitations. Some Vikings believed dreams were messages from the dead or glimpses of future battles. A dream could be a warning or a vision of something sacred. These weren't forgotten by morning. They were discussed, interpreted, even acted upon. Sleep wasn't just a necessity, it was a bridge to meaning, and the act of waking was gentle. The longhouse would come alive slowly, not with alarms, but with shifting bodies, stretching limbs, the creak of wood, the stirrings of livestock. Breath turned to words. The embers of the hearth were stirred back to flame. There was no rush, no panic, no burst of cortisol from a ringing phone. The world of the waking returned like dawn itself, gradually, reliably, without shock. Even when danger pressed close, their sleep was not stolen by fear. Because preparation was constant, tools were close, companions were near, gods were watching. Fear had no power when readiness was ever present. To lie down was not to let go of control, but to acknowledge that control had already been established by action, by structure, by belief. And so each night, with repetition that carved grooves into the soul, they surrendered, not because they were tired, though they always were, but because sleep was as much a part of life as breath. It was the trusted end to every day, the silent proof that the cycle continued. The world didn't stop while they slept. It held them. It turned gently beneath them. It hummed with the promise that the sun would rise, the livestock would call, the work would begin anew, and they would meet it, ready. This was not a fluke of time. It was not luck. It was the outcome of a world designed in harmony with human need. And as centuries passed, and that harmony was lost to machinery, electricity, and endless choice, we began to forget. We began to trade instinct for interference, rhythm for resistance. Now, sleep is a luxury, a mystery, a challenge. But for the people of Viking times, it was none of those things. It was simply what came next. No hesitation, no thought, no delay. They lived in a world that spoke clearly. Work, then rest. Light, then dark. Hunger, then feast. Fear, then fire. And when the last of those flames curled low in the longhouse, when the final story had been whispered, when the wolves had gone quiet and the gods had withdrawn from the edges of the night, sleep was not negotiated. It was accepted. With the same certainty, they gripped their oars, raised their blades, or planted their seeds. It was a part of them, and it never failed. So they closed their eyes, not to forget, but to receive, not to escape, but to enter, not to vanish, but to return, to the realm of dreams, to the deep memory of the soul, to the great rhythm that carried them through fire, frost, fear, and into the night without end. They didn't know insomnia. They didn't name anxiety. They didn't diagnose restlessness. because they had built their world to carry them gently into the dark. And the dark welcomed them, like an old friend, not cold or cruel, but familiar. It wrapped itself around their weary forms, not as a void, but as a shelter. To the people of Viking times, the night was not something to be feared. It was where their ancestors spoke. It was where the gods listened. It was where the deepest parts of the world and of themselves quietly opened. The stars overhead, though unseen from within the walls of turf and timber, still held meaning. They marked seasons. They guided sailors. They watched the living rest, unmoved by battle or harvest. Above the longhouses, the constellations turned slowly in the blackness. The same constellations they had memorized, sung about, passed down through generations as maps, omens, and signs. The sky itself was a storybook. And even in slumber, the people beneath it were part of its tale. They didn't fall asleep, wondering how many hours remained before dawn. They didn't stir to check the time or question the value of rest. Their minds didn't loop through half-finished conversations or tomorrow's obligations. Their world offered no room for that kind of spiraling thought. The day's work was either done or it wasn't. There was nothing left to say, no decisions left to make. Their bodies had been used fully. Their minds had emptied steadily. Their surroundings reinforced what their spirits already understood. It was time. Time not just to close their eyes, but to hand themselves over to something larger, not as submission, but as rhythm. Just as the tides retreat from the shore, the Viking mind receded into that sacred space where dreams live. A space without logic but full of meaning. A place where the living might meet the dead, where gods might whisper, where beasts of myth still prowled. And when they woke, they remembered. The dreams were not dust. They were part of the journey. Even sleep after grief was honored. When someone died, the body was washed, dressed, and laid to rest, not in fear, but in calm reverence. Sleep and death were siblings, not enemies. To close one's eyes for a final time was not failure, it was passage. And each night's sleep echoed that final surrender, that trust, that acceptance. They had no sleep gurus, no books on better habits, no supplements, strategies, or screensavers. Their world was their method. The wind that howled across the fjords, the flames that warmed their faces, the meals that filled their bellies. Each piece of the day nudged them toward the night, slowly, reassuringly. Even when they journeyed, sailing across storm-thrashed seas in longships carved by their own hands, they found sleep. Rolled in furs beneath a moonlit sky, rocked by the rhythm of waves and the creak of hulls, surrounded by their kin, they surrendered to rest. Because no matter where they were, their bond with sleep remained. Even the edge of the world could not sever it. And those who stayed home, the blacksmiths, the weavers, the mothers, the herders, they too knew rest not as escape, but as continuation. Their labor, while different, was no less exhaustive. Their routines were steady, their surroundings trusted. And when the lamps were snuffed and the children quieted, sleep returned again. Not as luxury, but as necessity, as inevitability. Their language reflected this reverence. Words for dreams, for night, for death, and for silence were often interchangeable in Old Norse poetry. Their skalds, keepers of stories, sang not just of glory and conquest, but of nightfall, of rest, of sleep as a return to source. In their verses, sleep was not absence, it was depth, a plunge into something below the surface of life, where truth rippled through darkness. And so, generation after generation, Vikings fell asleep not with effort, but with grace. Even their enemies, those who feared their raids and warriors, would admit that the Norse knew how to live and how to rest, because to them, the two were never separated. One fed the other. To rise strong, you must fall soft. To fight well, you must sleep fully. To meet fate, you must first let go of fear. And so they did, each night without fail, without resistance, without regret, without delay, until the fire dimmed to ashes, until breath turned to stillness, until their spirits drifted into the realm where gods and ghosts walked beside them. Their world did not shout at the night. It sang to it, and the night answered back with rest, with silence, with renewal. The Vikings did not conquer sleep. They befriended it, trusted it, and let it take them completely, unflinchingly, into the sacred hush where the soul finds peace. There were other reasons too, reasons often overlooked when we study Viking sleep through modern lenses. Chief among them was the absence of distraction, not just technological distraction, but psychological fragmentation. The Viking mind was not pulled in 10 directions at once. There were no screens flashing with updates, no advertisements echoing between thoughts, no hourly alarms dividing their focus. Their attention was whole, tethered to the task at hand, and then, in the evening, released entirely. That release was key. It was not partial, it was complete, and that completeness gave way to rest. In their spiritual worldview, much was attributed to unseen forces, runic magic, fate, omens, the whispers of spirits. But it was also a deeply embodied worldview. They understood the rhythms of their bodies because they listened to them. When hungry, they ate. When cold, they moved or lit fire. When tired, they rested. There was no pride in denying physical need. The body was not an inconvenience. It was the tool of life, the vessel of strength, and to ignore its signals was not virtuous. It was foolish. This belief in harmony between the body and the world extended to the places they slept. Even the ground had meaning. In winter, they layered furs over stone. In summer, they softened the earth with moss or straw. The choice of sleeping surface was not random. It was learned, honed over generations of responding to the land. Some families packed fragrant herbs beneath their bedding, not for luxury, but to repel pests and to calm the senses. Juniper, angelica, and mugwort all played roles in early Norse folk medicine, and their calming properties would have helped soothe the body into sleep. Their diets also worked in their favor. Without processed sugar or caffeine, their evening meals helped wind the body down rather than stimulate it. Fermented foods, wild greens, root vegetables, fish, and meat cooked slowly over open flames provided sustenance without disruption. These meals grounded them, filled their stomachs, warmed their blood, and prepared them to fall into sleep without biochemical interference. Community structure was another silent contributor. The stress of isolation, now known to be deeply harmful to sleep, was virtually non-existent in the Viking home. Solitude was rare. Even introversion took place within proximity to others. The longhouse was the heart of life, a shared space of work, meals, laughter, and rest. Sleep happened in a space of familiarity, among breathing bodies, under the same roof as generations of kin. The nervous system, detecting no threat, released its grip, and so sleep came. Movement throughout the day played a massive role. Vikings walked, they lifted, They pulled nets from the sea, chopped wood, forged metal, hoisted sails, and harvested grain. The entire day was one long sequence of physical engagement. Their bodies were fully used, muscles stretched, lungs filled, joints worked. This was not exercise performed for vanity or artificial goals. It was movement with purpose, and when movement ends with fatigue, sleep follows quickly behind. Their exposure to natural light also gave them a powerful advantage. Sunrise marked the beginning, sunset marked the end. There were no flickering bulbs or glowing screens to mislead their circadian rhythms. The arc of the sun dictated their hormonal flow. Wakefulness rose with light, and melatonin surged with dark. Their biology wasn't overridden by invention. It was honored. Add to this their respect for silence, not the absolute kind, but the natural one. The kind that holds space for the small sounds of life. The breath of animals, the pop of the fire, the rustle of a fur blanket. There was no constant audio track running behind their thoughts. Sound meant something. It was either practical or sacred. And when there was nothing more to be said or done, silence filled the space. Not as awkwardness, but as rest. And in this rest, the mind found its stillness. They didn't fall asleep having absorbed 100 unrelated images, conversations, or sounds. Their evenings narrowed their focus. First the work, then the meal, then the story or the song, and finally, the breath. Everything slowed. The nervous system downshifted without resistance. They weren't fighting momentum. They were following gravity. Ritual, too, shaped their nights. While they may not have had rituals that looked like our bedtime routines, their lives were ritualistic by nature. Lighting the fire, washing the face, speaking words of protection, laying weapons in a specific place, wrapping a child in the same fur each night. These acts were ordinary, but their repetition gave the mind and body a clear path to sleep. Predictability bred peace. There was also the cold. Modern people flee from cold, bundling themselves in heated rooms. But the Vikings lived with it. And cold, when paired with sufficient insulation, has been shown to support deeper sleep. A cold room, a warm body, and stillness all around. It's a formula now marketed by sleep experts, but it was simply reality for those in the north. Their understanding of fear also played a role. Fear was not an abstract knowing of what if. It was direct, physical, immediate. If there was danger, it was handled. If there wasn't, it wasn't imagined. Their minds weren't swarming with hypothetical threats or abstract uncertainties. They lived in presence, and presence does not steal rest. It restores it. There was nothing passive about their sleep. It was hard-earned, fiercely protected, and absolutely vital. And because of this, it came easily. Not through force, not through ritualized struggle, but through rhythm, discipline, and the invisible architecture of their world. Everything, from the way they worked, to the way they ate, the way they prayed, to the way they believed, contributed to a single profound outcome. When night fell, and the sky turned black, and the cold crept in through the walls, they lay down with the confidence of those who had done what was needed, feared nothing unseen, trusted the land, and understood their place within it. And then they let go. No final mental checklist, no second thoughts, no internal negotiations about sleep quality or guilt about the day's productivity. Their sleep did not come from trying harder. It came from not needing to try at all. They had already done everything their bodies and minds required. Their systems weren't overloaded with competing inputs. Their days didn't pull them in opposing directions. They weren't overstimulated. They weren't underexposed to daylight. They weren't malnourished or surrounded by invisible noise. They were, in every sense, synchronized with themselves, with each other, and with the earth. Even in their belief systems, peace and readiness were baked into their understanding of life and death. In the Norse cosmology, everything was connected. The 9 worlds, the world tree Yggdrasil, the fates of gods and men. To be alive was to occupy a place within a great structure that did not depend on your understanding. Your job was to fulfill your role, to live with courage, to honor kin, to maintain strength, and when your time came, to greet it without fear. This belief quieted the mind, not with ignorance, but with clarity. There was no constant existential questioning, no clinging to control over things beyond grasp. This inner stillness made room for outer stillness, the kind of stillness that allows sleep to rise like a tide and wash over the body without resistance. They didn't treat the bedroom as a second office. They didn't check messages before laying down. They didn't stare at glowing rectangles. Their eyes adjusted to dusk naturally. The bodies cooled with the air. The thoughts narrowed, guided by firelight and the gentle cadence of spoken words. And as the flames flickered lower and shadows grew longer, there was nothing left to stay awake for. Even the nature of their speech played a role. The cadence of Norse storytelling, of lullabies and mythic songs, followed patterns, slow, measured, rhythmic. These spoken traditions helped regulate the body's internal tempo. They were the original bedtime stories, crafted not for entertainment, but for cohesion. These tales weren't always comforting, but they were anchoring. They helped the listener feel placed within a family, within a lineage, within a cosmology. This deep sense of being placed is something that modern life often erodes. We live with disconnection, social, spiritual, sensory. We chase grounding through apps and techniques. The people of Viking times had it simply because of how they lived. Their sense of home was not abstract. It was walls they had built, fire they had lit, food they had hunted, grown, and cooked. Resting in that environment meant something. You were not surrounded by strangers' inventions, unknown toxins, artificial lights, or unfamiliar rhythms. You were surrounded by what you made, what you knew, and who you loved. And even in times of loss or mourning, the act of sleep remained sacred. Grief did not steal the night. In fact, rituals of mourning often included prescribed rest, dreams interpreted as visitations from the dead, and quiet periods where the bereaved were shielded from disruption. Rest was part of healing. Sleep was respected as a medicine, not indulgence. Children absorbed this from their first days. Swaddled in wool, rocked near firelight, they learned the rhythms of rest, not through instruction, but by living inside a world that honored it. Their parents did not whisper anxiously about how many hours of sleep they should get, or how to get them back on schedule. There was no need. The schedule was already built into the rise and fall of light, into the tempo of the village, into the beat of life itself. Viking homes did not section off sleep into a separate category of life. There was no artificial boundary between living and resting. The two flowed into one another. Movement led to fatigue. Fatigue led to sleep. Sleep led to energy. And the cycle turned. Even their posture in sleep was deliberate. Whether curled on their sides in tight space or stretched beside the fire, or nestled between children and pets. They adapted to the season and the structure. They didn't argue with their environment. They harmonized with it. A warrior might sleep with his back to a wall, his blade within reach, not in fear, but in preparedness. That sense of preparation didn't cause anxiety. It allowed rest. Because to the Viking mind, safety wasn't the absence of danger. It was the presence of readiness. And readiness brought peace. This peace, built slowly each day through structured belief and rhythm, created an inner space untouched by the chaos that defines modern restlessness. It meant they didn't have to wonder if they would sleep that night. They knew they would. It wasn't luck. It was design. And when sleep came, it came not in fragments, not with shallow breath and twitching limbs, but deeply, falling into the abyss of the night like a stone dropped into still water. No ripples, no noise, just darkness and surrender. And that surrender restored them. Night after night, storm after storm, generation after generation, they rose because they had rested. And they rested because they had lived in a way that made rest the only possible outcome. Not a reward, not a struggle, a certainty. This certainty was built not only on daily structure or belief, but also on the way Viking communities balanced effort with trust. Another reason they slept so well was their interdependence. They lived in tightly knit social groups where responsibility was shared. If someone kept watch, it was someone they knew. If food was prepared, it was someone they trusted. If the fire was tended through the night, it was done by hands they had seen work before. This kind of communal confidence relieved the individual from the need to stay alert. The brain, wired to protect, could rest, knowing others were awake, capable, and loyal. Their laws and customs further contributed to this trust. Viking law was often enforced through assemblies called things, where disputes were settled and community order was maintained. While violent by nature and tradition, the society had rules that created a sense of order in their villages and camps. A sense that things, however harsh, followed a rhythm. And order breeds rest, not because chaos is eliminated, but because it's made predictable. They also lived without the endless decisions that plague modern minds. Today, our attention is shattered by choices: what to eat, what to watch, what to wear, what to do next. Every moment demands evaluation. But the Viking day was largely predetermined. Weather, season, and necessity dictated the flow. There were few opportunities for decision fatigue to erode their mental energy. And without that erosion, they had more mental space to surrender to sleep when the time came. Even their exposure to temperature fluctuations played a role. They didn't sleep in climate-controlled environments with a single fixed temperature. Their bodies acclimated to the changes of day and night, summer and winter. This trained their systems to regulate themselves, to adapt, and to reset each evening. The cool air of night, the warmth of a body-wrapped fur, the slow cooling of embers, these things signaled the body to slow down. Their internal clocks were well calibrated to the land. Their relationship to animals was another quiet influence. In many longhouses, animals were kept in the same structure or an adjoining space, especially in winter. The body heat of livestock added warmth, yes, but their presence also provided a low-frequency hum of movement and breath, natural white noise. These familiar, living sounds grounded the Viking sleeper in a world of continuity. The cow shifting in its stall, the dog huffing softly, the horse's muffled hooves. All of it reinforced safety and connection. And while modern minds are often burdened by endless abstraction, Viking thought was deeply rooted in the physical world. When they were awake, they worked with their hands. When they told stories, they used real landmarks and symbols. Their mythology was tactile. Gods who walked the earth, monsters with flesh, heroes who carved their names into stone. This physical anchoring meant their minds didn't drift into the kind of abstract stressors that make modern sleep so elusive. Their thoughts stayed close to what was real, and the real was something they could see, touch, and shape. They also had no exposure to artificial frequencies. Today, we live in a bath of unseen signals, Wi-Fi, electromagnetic fields, 24/7 radio transmissions that subtly stimulate the nervous system. The Viking world had none of this. The air was clean. The night was electrically silent. The only vibrations were those of wind, voice, and fire, natural, harmonic, ancestral. The body in that environment was not pulled in multiple directions. It sank. And then there's the matter of expectations. Vikings didn't measure the quality of their sleep. They didn't wear rings that tracked it or apps that scored it. They didn't worry about whether it was deep enough. Because of this, they didn't resist rest or judge it. They simply accepted it. This lack of analysis allowed them to fall asleep faster and deeper, a cycle of ease that grew stronger each day. They also didn't interrupt their evenings with artificial stimulation. No blaring screens, no traffic, no ambient stress from a world wider than what they could physically see. Their sphere of concern ended at the edge of the village, the end of the field, or the border of their lands. What was beyond it existed only in myth, not in anxiety, and that shrinking of the mental field helped collapse the mind into calm. In times of war or danger, their bodies responded appropriately, tense, alert, ready. But when the danger passed, they returned to stillness quickly. Their nervous systems were used to true rest and knew how to get there again. This cycle of activation and recovery made them resilient, and resilience, in turn, makes it easier to sleep. When you trust your body, your tribe, and your gods, you don't have to lie awake wondering what might happen. You've already prepared for it. Even aging didn't disturb the Viking sleeper. Older members of the community were not isolated, medicated, or marginalized. They remained surrounded by familiarity, family, tradition, language, weather, and these constants made sleep easier. They were allowed to rest more often, to take naps, to slow down with dignity. The rhythm of life adjusted to them, not the other way around. And that respect preserved their connection to natural rest. There was also rhythm in their faith. Their rituals were not weekly distractions or rare performances. They were woven into life. Carving a symbol, pouring out a drink, saying a name, lighting a fire with intention. These acts gave shape to the day and the closure to the evening. Closure is essential for sleep. Without it, the mind stays open, searching. The Vikings knew how to end the day cleanly, and once it ended, they let it go. So as darkness swept across the land, covering fjords and forests, quieting the seas and cooling the earth, the people of Viking times didn't brace themselves against it. They welcomed it. They prepared for it. And then they entered it, not as a crisis, but as a rhythm. And that rhythm carried them down, breath by breath, into the kind of sleep we no longer remember. The kind untouched by fear, unmeasured by data, undisturbed by invention. the kind of sleep that belongs not to the modern world, but to the one that came before it. And the world that came before their world was built to honor that kind of sleep. Every part of their environment, every custom, every element of the Viking lifestyle flowed toward rest like rivers to the sea. Even conflict and hardship didn't rob them of it. In fact, hardship made rest more essential, more sacred. They endured bitter cold, grueling labor, long voyages, and violent confrontation. But they didn't carry these experiences into the night as unresolved tension. They lived fully, and when the day ended, they closed it. This ability to compartmentalize came not from denial, but from clarity. Viking life was direct. You fought, you fed your family, you endured the weather, and you told stories of gods and monsters. There was little space for abstract dread or self-doubt. The harshness of life required decisiveness, and decisiveness quiets the mind. When the work of the day was complete, there was nothing left to decide. No lingering options, no endless loops, just the fire, the cold, the weight of fur, and the heaviness of the body surrendering to rest. And that surrender was complete. The absence of stimulation gave way to a full-body descent into rest. No flickering lights behind the eyelids, no echoes of electronic alerts, no humming machines. The Viking night was acoustically quiet, visually dark, and biologically affirming. It invited the body to power down, not jolt awake. Even their language reflected an unhurried view of time and endings. Old Norse words for evening and night were not tied to panic or closure, but to transitions, flowing from light to shadow, from speech to silence. They saw the passing of the sun as something majestic, not something to race against. And in that awe, they found calm. They weren't bombarded with headlines, tragedies, statistics, and distant disasters. News came slowly, through travelers, stories, songs, not in constant streams of anxiety. Their sense of urgency was grounded in the physical world. The approaching storm, the empty food stores, the threat at the village border. But once these were faced or prepared for, they left the mind. The Viking mind was alert when it needed to be and silent when it could be. That silence made space for sleep. Another reason for their instant rest was their ritual relationship with fire. More than just heat, fire was a living presence. It cooked, protected, healed, and lit the dark. It was watched, fed, honored. Children were taught to tend it with care. It formed a psychological anchor. The hearth was safety. As long as it burned, all was well. That flickering light trained the brain to slow down. Its randomness is soothing to the eyes. Its sound softens tension. Even the scent of wood smoke became a cue. When the fire dimmed, the body followed. The communal nature of their homes was also a factor. Sleeping alone was rare. Most people drifted off among kin, parents, siblings, children, cousins. This proximity released oxytocin and dulled cortisol. Even in war camps, warriors rested beside one another, sharing warmth, readiness, and comfort. Today's isolation, apartment walls, closed bedroom doors, earbuds, separates us from those primal reassurances. The Vikings had no such barriers. Their stillness was shared. And then there was their relationship to storytelling, not the passive consumptive kind we engage with today, but participatory, embodied, and sacred. Stories weren't just entertainment. They were memory, history, instruction, and medicine. And they were told at night, around the hearth, in the glow of flame, voices lowered, rhythms slowed. The listener's breath would fall into sync with the speaker's. words became lullabies. These tales carved grooves in the mind, places where dreams could later follow. Their spiritual practices also contributed. The Viking worldview included cycles of death and rebirth, gods who died and returned, worlds that ended and began again. This cosmic pattern gave meaning to rest. Sleep wasn't absence, it was renewal, a necessary surrender so the next day could rise with purpose. They didn't resist that surrender. They saw it as their part in the eternal cycle. Even illness didn't disrupt their approach. When unwell, rest was prescribed through herbs, salves, time by the fire, and darkness. The sick were allowed to retreat from labor without shame. Their bodies were given time. Their sleep was not robbed by productivity culture or guilt. It was seen as essential to recovery, the same as medicine or food. They also experienced natural darkness in a way we no longer do. In Viking lands, night was not diluted by city lights. It was pure, thick, absolute. The absence of ambient glow allowed the brain's chemistry to follow its ancient path. Melatonin production rose steadily. The absence of visual input told the brain it was safe to stop interpreting. It was safe to rest. That sensory withdrawal allowed sleep to come like a tide. The physical materials surrounding them helped too. They slept wrapped in wool, beneath hides, upon straw, or carved planks softened with moss. Their bedding was alive, breathing, warming, cooling in response to the body. The very smell of it, earth, smoke, skin, sweat, was grounding. Nothing was sterile, chemical, or synthetic. Every sensory cue reinforced presence, continuity, and comfort. And perhaps one of the most profound, if quiet, reasons they slept so instantly was this: they were not seeking escape. For modern people, sleep is often a refuge, a way to flee stress, to stop thinking, to numb out. But for Vikings, life itself, as hard as it was, did not require escaping. It was hard, but it was real. It was brutal, but it was theirs. They didn't crave oblivion. They welcomed recovery. They didn't collapse into sleep. They stepped into it as a craftsman steps into a familiar room. And so, as the wind slipped through cracks in wooden walls, and embers sank low in the ash, and the night animals called in the distance, the people of Viking times lay down, not with reluctance, not with a racing mind, not with blue light behind their eyes, but with the calm of those who had lived in rhythm, given their strength to the day, and asked for nothing more than rest in return. And rest is what they received, instantly, night after night, generation after generation. And this rest, ancient, complete, unshaken, wove itself into the very fabric of Viking identity. It was not a pause between tasks. It was a continuation of life's cycle. Just as breath follows exertion and the tide follows the moon, sleep followed their waking hours with absolute regularity. It was as reliable as hunger after work, as sunrise after dark. They did not question it. They did not delay it. They did not fear it, because they trusted it. This trust was not abstract. It came from the consistency of their world. Every morning was a renewal. Every evening, a surrender. Their bodies were calibrated to the arc of the sun, to the movement of wind and water, to the crackle of fire and the softness of fur. This calibration brought certainty. Certainty brought peace. And peace, uninterrupted by doubt or distraction, brought sleep. Even during long journeys across sea or land, they carried these rhythms with them. Viking seafarers, hardened by the cold and the wet, still found sleep on open boats, curled beneath cloaks, sheltered beneath tarps of woven wool. The rocking of the ship mimicked the lull of the womb. The splash of water and creak of wood became a lullaby. And when they landed, no matter how foreign the shore, they created rest from what was at hand: earth, fire, kinship, routine. Their adaptability did not replace their ritual, it extended it. The Viking way of sleeping was not dependent on luxury. It was born from resilience. They did not need silence to rest. They needed familiarity. They did not need comfort in the modern sense. They needed rhythm, trust, and earned exhaustion.